They disappeared on a morning that felt ordinary in every possible way. The kind of morning that doesn't announce itself as important, when the sky hangs pale over the mountains and the air smells like pine and cold stone. They were young, restless, and convinced that the wilderness was safer than the lives they had left behind. Colorado was supposed to be temporary, a place to breathe, to wander, to feel free from expectations. They told friends they were going off-grid for a while, hiking deeper than usual, chasing quiet instead of plans. No one thought much of it. People like them vanished from social media all the time, only to reappear weeks later with stories and photos. At first, the silence felt romantic. No calls, no posts, no check-ins. Days turned into weeks, and concern grew slowly, like a shadow stretching at sunset. Their families called park services, then the police. Search teams combed trails they were known to love, following boot prints that vanished into rocky ground. A campsite was found near a river, untouched, as if abandoned mid-thought. 2 backpacks sat beside a dying fire ring. Food remained sealed. Phones were gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no torn fabric. Just absence, the kind that settles heavy in the chest. News stations picked up the story. A young couple lost in the Colorado wilderness. Comment sections filled with theories. Accident, wildlife, voluntary disappearance. A shared decision to walk away from everything. Search efforts intensified, then slowed, then quietly stopped. Winter crept in, burying trails under snow and hope under time. Eventually, their faces faded from headlines, replaced by newer tragedies. Only their families kept waiting, living in a state between grief and denial. A year passed. Then one night, at a gas station on the edge of a small town, a man walked out of the darkness. He looked like someone who had forgotten how to be seen. His hair hung long and uneven, his beard tangled, his skin weathered and scarred. His clothes were dirty, mismatched, hanging loosely on a body that had grown lean and hardened. He moved slowly, carefully, like every step required permission. People noticed him because he didn't belong, because his presence bent the air around him. When the cashier asked if he needed help, he didn't answer at first. His eyes flicked to the security camera, then away. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, unfamiliar even to himself. He asked for water. Then he gave a name. The name stopped everything. Police arrived within minutes. Photos were pulled up on phones, then verified in silence. It was him, one half of the vanished couple. Alive. Alone. The questions came fast, overlapping, desperate. Where had he been? What happened? Where was she? He didn't answer most of them. He wrapped his arms around himself, stared at the floor, and shook. At the station, under harsh lights, he repeated only one thing. He said he had walked out of the mountains alone. He said he had been surviving. He said the truth wouldn't help anyone. When word spread, the story exploded again. A miracle return, a survivor, a mystery reborn. People wanted hope. They wanted closure. They wanted him to say she had died in an accident, that it had been tragic but simple. He didn't give them that. He refused interviews. He refused to guide search teams back to where they had gone. He refused to explain the scars on his back or the way he flinched at sudden sounds. Those closest to him noticed the changes first. He barely slept. When he did, he woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, whispering apologies to no one. He avoided mirrors. He ate like someone who feared food might disappear if he didn't finish it immediately. When asked about her, his eyes filled with something heavier than grief. Guilt lived there, Fear, too. Authorities pressed harder. Survivors didn't just return without answers. Not after a year, not without leads. They showed him maps, satellite images, timelines. He stared through them all, as if the mountains were still wrapped around his mind. When they asked directly if she was alive, he went quiet for a long time. Long enough for the room to feel smaller. He said he didn't know if she would want to be found. That sentence changed everything. Rumors spread fast. People questioned his innocence. Armchair detectives dissected his words, his posture, his silence. Why had only he survived? Why come back now? Why refuse to help? The more pressure mounted, the more he withdrew. Yet pieces of the truth leaked out in fragments, slipped during late-night questioning, or whispered to a nurse who sat with him when he couldn't stop shaking. He spoke of getting lost, of trails that vanished, of choosing paths that felt right but led deeper into nowhere. He spoke of hunger and cold and fear that settled into the bones. He spoke of meeting people he hadn't expected to meet, far from roads and maps. People who didn't want to be found. People who lived by different rules. He never said what happened to her. But those who listened closely could hear it in the pauses, in the way his hands trembled when her name was spoken. Whatever had happened in those mountains hadn't ended with her disappearance. It had followed him back, and the longer he stayed silent, the clearer it became that the truth, when it came out, would destroy more than it healed. The questions didn't stop after the first night. If anything, they grew sharper, more focused, circling him like predators that sensed weakness. Investigators changed tactics, slowing their voices, softening their expressions, pretending patience. They told him they understood trauma. They said that survival did strange things to memory. They promised they only wanted to bring her home. He listened, nodded, and said nothing useful. Days passed, then weeks. He was placed in a temporary shelter under supervision, not arrested, not free. Outside, the world argued about him. Some called him a victim, a man broken by nature and loss. Others called him a liar, convinced he knew exactly what had happened and was hiding it behind silence. Her family spoke publicly, pleading for answers, begging him to help them find their daughter. Each time he saw their faces on a screen, his chest tightened until breathing hurt. At night, the memories refused to stay buried. He remembered the early days clearly, how excited they had been, laughing as they pushed deeper into the wilderness, convinced they were capable of anything together. They trusted each other more than maps, more than warnings posted at trailheads. When the weather turned suddenly, they treated it like an inconvenience, not a threat. When the trail markers thinned, they kept walking, telling themselves they'd find their way back. Getting lost wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. A slow realization that every direction looked the same. They rationed food at first, confident rescue would come. When days passed with no signs of anyone else, confidence gave way to tension. Small arguments flared, then faded. Hunger made them irritable. Cold made them careless. Fear made them cling to each other even as it pushed them apart. The forest watched without judgment. Then came the others. He remembered the first time they noticed they were being watched. The feeling crawled up his spine before he saw anything at all. Shadows where shadows shouldn't be. Footprints near their camp that weren't theirs. At first, he told himself it was paranoia. She didn't agree. She had always been more observant, more willing to trust her instincts. When she said they weren't alone, he wished he had listened harder. The people they encountered didn't look dangerous at first. They were thin, weathered, dressed in layers of scavenged clothing. They spoke little, smiled less. They claimed to live off the land, far from society by choice. They offered food, shelter, and directions, all delivered with unsettling calm. Desperation outweighed caution. Accepting help felt like survival. They were taken to a place that didn't exist on any map. Hidden cabins stitched together with time and neglect. Fires that never fully went out. Faces that watched newcomers closely, measuring their usefulness. It was a community built on disappearing, on staying forgotten. Leaving wasn't encouraged. Asking questions wasn't wise. At first, they told themselves it was temporary, just until they regained strength, just until they learned the way back. But days stretched again, and rules emerged without ever being spoken. He learned which paths were forbidden, which conversations ended abruptly, which looks meant warning. She struggled more than he did. She resisted quietly, asking questions, observing patterns. She whispered plans at night, tracing escape routes in the dirt with her finger. He wanted to believe they could leave together, but fear had already taken root in him. Fear of punishment. Fear of losing the fragile safety they'd been given. Fear of what these people were capable of if crossed. The night everything broke apart replayed itself endlessly in his mind. She had decided they were leaving, with or without permission. She woke him before dawn, urgency sharp in her eyes. She said she couldn't stay there anymore. She said something was wrong, deeply wrong. He hesitated. He argued. He told her they needed more time, that leaving unprepared would get them killed. His words came from fear, not reason, but fear spoke louder. They were overheard. What followed wasn't violent in the way people expected. No screams, no blood, just control. Separation. She was taken away under the pretense of protection. He was told she was being kept safe, that her resistance had put them both at risk, that compliance was the only way to survive. Days turned into weeks again. He wasn't allowed to see her. Each time he asked, the answers grew colder. He was given tasks, responsibilities, a role. Slowly, almost without noticing, he adapted. Survival demanded it. Guilt became a constant ache, dull enough to live with but never gone. Then one morning, she was gone. No explanation, no trace. He was told she had chosen a different path, that she didn't want him to follow, that searching would only make things worse. He didn't believe them, but belief didn't matter anymore. By then, he understood the rules well enough to know when hope was dangerous. Leaving became his only thought after that. Not to find her, not anymore. Just to escape before he disappeared completely too. It took months of planning, of pretending loyalty, of waiting for the right moment. When he finally ran, he didn't look back. He didn't stop until the mountains loosened their grip and civilization crept back into view. Now, sitting in a quiet room far from the forest, he understood why he couldn't tell the full truth. Because admitting what really happened meant admitting his own failure. Not just that he survived when she didn't, but that he had chosen fear over her. And that was a secret heavier than any mountain. He thought leaving the mountains would end it. That once he crossed the invisible line back into roads and lights and names, the past would loosen its hold. It didn't. The forest had followed him, not in trees and dirt, but in the habits it carved into his mind. He still listened for footsteps behind him. Still woke before dawn, heart racing, convinced someone was standing over him. Safety felt temporary, like everything else had been. The investigators came again, this time with a different tone. Less pressure, more certainty. They told him they had been searching the area where he had been found. They had discovered signs of long-term habitation far from any registered land. Old structures, fire pits, trails that deliberately avoided detection. It confirmed parts of his story, enough to make his silence more suspicious rather than less. They needed specifics now, locations, names, anything. He stared at the table between them and realized something had shifted. He wasn't protecting her anymore. He was protecting himself. When he finally spoke, it wasn't the full truth. It was a version shaped to be survivable. He admitted they had met others. He admitted they had stayed longer than intended. He said she had left during the night, disoriented, possibly injured, and never returned. He let them believe the wilderness had finished what it started. The story satisfied procedure. It fit the pattern of countless disappearances blamed on nature. The case was quietly moved toward closure. Her family never stopped searching. Months later, a hiker reported strange markings on trees miles from any trail. Symbols carved with intention, not randomness. Nearby, authorities found remnants of a settlement long since abandoned. The structures were burned, deliberately dismantled. Whoever had lived there didn't want to be remembered. No bodies were found. No personal belongings that could be identified, just absence again. Public interest flared briefly, then faded. The man returned to a life that looked normal from the outside. He worked. He smiled when expected. He avoided mountains. At night, he replayed moments he wished he could rewrite. The last look she gave him before they were separated. The trust in her eyes, unbroken even then. That was what haunted him most. He tried to convince himself she might still be alive somewhere, that she had escaped in a way he hadn't. That silence was her choice, not her fate. But hope felt like another kind of punishment. Every possibility led back to the same truth. He had failed her when it mattered most. The dark secret wasn't what people assumed. It wasn't violence or betrayal in the way headlines craved. It was something quieter, harder to forgive. When faced with a moment that demanded courage, he had chosen safety instead. He had let others take control because resistance scared him more than loss. Survival had asked for a price, and he had paid it with someone else's freedom. In the end, he understood why the mountains were full of stories like theirs. Not because they were cruel, but because they stripped people down to what they truly were. Heroes and cowards weren't born there. They were revealed. Somewhere deep in Colorado, places still existed that didn't want to be found. Places built on fear and silence, and the unspoken agreement that the world was better off not knowing. And somewhere within those places, whether alive or only in memory, she remained. He carried her with him always, not as a mystery to be solved, but as a reminder of the choice he could never undo. And that was the punishment he would live with for the rest of his life.